Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. It's about time for another deep dive into this Ole Miss program and talking about where they are going in the transfer portal the next couple of days. I want to do two things. One, talk Logan Diggs and talk about what his commitment meant to Ole Miss because I didn't get a chance to cover that for you guys a couple days ago when he committed. And then more importantly, talking about a few key visitors that Ole Miss will have on campus this weekend out of the transfer portal. Really excited to get into this one. And the Ole Miss fans that have listened for the last couple of weeks kind of know how I feel about what Lane Kiffin is doing in the transfer portal. I mean, I'm a huge fan of what he's doing and how he's going about constructing this roster to a point where you look at the 2024 landscape and say, this is one of those teams that is not only going to be competing for an SEC title and going to be in the upper echelon of this conference, but a team that can seriously make some noise in the college football playoffs as well. Really excited to get into this one. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys and a shout out to the Ole Miss fans. It's been a blast talking this program. Over the last couple of weeks, we're doing what seems like almost daily check-ins on what Ole Miss is doing in the transfer portal. Cannot thank you guys enough for all the support you guys have shown. If you guys do enjoy the content, you enjoy the updates, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll continue to keep you guys updated as possible with what Ole Miss is doing in the transfer portal. And without further ado, I want to start with Logan Diggs and talk a little bit about what he brings to this Ole Miss roster. And I think the first thing that you want to start with is a proven running back at the SEC level. And this is a guy that was successful his first 2 years at Notre Dame. He transfers and follows Brian Kelly over to LSU, averages 5.5 yards per carry for LSU in 2023. There were talks about Logan Diggs entering into the NFL draft. I think that's how complete of a running back that he is. And I mean, you go back 2 weeks ago when Judkins hit the transfer portal, there was, conversations about the depth and the players that would be in this Ole Miss running back room. Obviously, Ulysses Bentley coming back is massive. You feel really good about adding Logan Diggs and a guy like Riscano, who I think Ole Miss likes a lot as a young back in that backfield. You look at this running back room today, and massive check mark. This is a very good running back room heading into the 2024 season. You add an experienced guy like Logan Diggs, who's done it at the level. And I think it was important to add Logan Diggs from kind of a depth standpoint, right? Ole Miss wants to run fast. They want to run a lot of plays on offense. You want to have a deep running back room of guys that you can rotate in and out, keeping fresh all 4 quarters, 12 games a year. That's kind of what Logan Diggs brings to this Ole Miss offense. I have a feeling this running game, with what they've done on the offensive line, bringing in guys like Diego Pounds, Dayquon Scott, it's really not going to miss a beat in my mind. And again, that's not me taking away from Quinshon Judkins. It's more just saying, they're making improvements to the offensive line. They have very capable running backs, and there's going to be a lot of light boxes, right? When you have Trey Harris, Juice Wells on the outside, teams are not going to be loading the box on this Ole Miss team. So I think they'll be able to run the football relatively effectively, not relatively effectively, just effectively in 2024. Now, I want to get to some of the top targets that Ole Miss has visiting on campus. And from what it sounds like, the 3 names that we're going to talk about are all kind of top targets for Ole Miss. And you think they have a very good chance at landing some of these guys. And I want to start with safety Yam Banks coming over from South Alabama. Now, listed as a safety, you go back and watch Yam Banks. You look at where he takes his snaps, much more of that nickel defender. Box safety, but plays a lot of nickel. And I think this is probably the most underrated position in all of college football on the defensive side of the football. Now, you talk a lot about boundary cornerbacks and edge rushers. That nickel role and where college football is right now, with teams trying to spread you out and get as much speed on the field as they can, dealing with those slot defenders and having an extra defensive back on the field is pretty much exclusively where college football defenses are going. And I think having a nickel that you trust is absolutely massive in this era of college football. And Yam Banks, there's a reason he's a top target for a lot of Power 5 programs, because he's a reliable nickel that you can have on the field pretty much all 3 downs. Now, you look at Michigan and the success they've had on defense. I think a large part of that was Mikey Sandstro playing that nickel role. And I think Yam Banks can kind of come in for Ole Miss and be that reliable nickel that is dealing with those slot wide receivers and putting his nose in the run game. Very, very good in coverage. In 2022, 6 interceptions, 11 passes defended, has played over 2,300 snaps during his career at South Alabama. Then you look at the 2023 year, faced 46 targets, only gave up 28 catches. This is a guy that is experienced. He's played at a high level and has all the physical traits that you want in an SEC caliber player. Now, the one thing that watching Yam Banks a little bit, looking at some of the numbers that I think he'd want to improve if he winds up coming to Ole Miss is the tackling. Like when you have that nickel role, you want to make sure those nickels, you're pretty much replacing a linebacker for another defensive back. They need to be a force in the run game. And Yam Banks, although has the physicality to play in the box and take on blocks and make tackles, sometimes plays a little out of control in the run game and misses some tackles, missed over 20% of his tackles in 2023. You want to see that get cleaned up. But what I'm optimistic about is that Yam Banks at 6'1", 210 pounds, like that's not I'm physically not capable of tackling. That is, we just got to slow down, play a little bit more in phase here and make our tackles. And so Yam Banks is a guy that I think would be a massive addition to this Ole Miss defense. The next guy I want to talk about, and a guy that I am very, very excited about, is Kendrick Blackshire coming over from Alabama. And obviously you have the Pete Golden relationship is going to play a factor here. The reason I'm excited about Kendrick Blackshire, one, I mean, hasn't played a ton, only played 102 snaps for Alabama in 2023. He played his actual most snaps of a game against Ole Miss, played 23 snaps in that game. Not a starter for Alabama, was not a significant contributor for Alabama, actually graded out as the highest PFF defender on Alabama's team in 2023. But I'm most excited about what he can be for Ole Miss. This is a guy that you look at Alabama's linebacker room with guys like Deontay Lawson and Jahad Campbell. It was loaded. It was very talented. A guy like Kendrick Blackshire kind of got lost in the rotation a little bit at Alabama. But one thing you can't really, deny about a guy like Kendrick Blackshire is the physical traits that he brings to the table, right? You take a look at the measurables. You take a look at how they talked about him coming out of high school, played at Duncanville in Texas, 6'2", 240 pounds. Like he looks exactly like you want a linebacker to look. If you were building a linebacker in a laboratory, and that's Kendrick Blackshire, right? Be able to go sideline to sideline, have the length to take on blocks, carry tight ends up the seam. He's checking a lot of boxes from a physical trait standpoint in terms of what you want in a linebacker. You get him into this Ole Miss program, you give him a little bit more opportunity. This could be a guy that we're talking about as being a very important contributor for this Ole Miss defense. And they've had a ton of success going to the transfer portal and grabbing linebackers, right? Obviously, Chris Paul coming in from Arkansas this year, but I go back to in years past where they've grabbed veteran linebackers that come in and they've done a very, very good job. Even going back to Chance Campbell a couple of years ago in the transfer portal, they've done a very good job evaluating linebackers, getting them into the program. A guy like Kendrick Blackshire, a ton of upside if he ends up coming to Ole Miss. The last guy I want to talk about, and we spent a little time talking about him for the last couple of weeks, really, is Dayquon Wright, tight end from Virginia Tech. And this is a guy that, if you guys remember me talking about him, perfect fit in this Lane Kiffin offense, where you talk about a matchup nightmare, 6'4", 240 plus pounds, coming out of high school, ran an 11-second 100-meter dash time. So you're talking about a big body that safeties are going to have a very hard time dealing with the physicality, and linebackers simply cannot run with the guy like Dayquon Wright. Matchup nightmare. And we kind of compared him a little bit to Michael Trigg, and what Ole Miss wanted, and Michael Trigg just never really worked out. Dayquon Wright, extremely productive at Virginia Tech the first 2 years, 47 catches for over 550 receiving yards in an offense that didn't have a quarterback, didn't have much of a passing attack. I mean, there's a reason Dayquon Wright is sought after by schools like Texas A&M and other Power 5 programs. I mean, dripping with talent. And this is a guy that I think the transfer portal, Dayquon Wright was a player that was meant for the transfer portal, right? A guy that was super talented. He goes to Virginia Tech, kind of gets stuck in an offense that is not really suiting what he can do best, and has the opportunity now to go out and play for an offense that is going to fit what he can do. And I couldn't think of a better fit for a guy like Dayquon Wright than at Ole Miss. Matchup nightmare. You pair him up with Caden Prescorn, an absolute problem in this passing attack, working the seam, working after the catch. Now, Ole Miss and their strategy in the transfer portal going forward, you've seen them be, I feel like the narrative around Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss is that we're just going to offer everyone in the transfer portal. Like, yes, they've been extremely aggressive in the portal, but you've seen them shy away from certain guys, right? A guy like former 5-star offensive tackles and Lance Hurd was rumored to be an Ole Miss target, and it sounds like Ole Miss has kind of just passed on him. And I think that speaks to what Lane Kiffin's doing in terms of, being calculated, letting a guy like Judkins walk. And that was a decision that had to be made. It was a hard decision, but if you want to build a complete roster, you have to make some of those decisions. So I think Judkins was an example. I think Lance Hurd was an example. But Ole Miss is targeting the guys that they think are going to help them close that gap in 2024. Some of these visitors that'll be on campus this weekend are certainly some of those targets that I think will help Ole Miss kind of get to that next level in 2024. We'll continue to keep you guys updated with this one. I would be very surprised if we didn't talk about one of these three guys this weekend committing to Ole Miss. Excited to keep you guys updated. This is a very fun team to talk about. I've been having a blast. Cannot thank you guys enough for rocking with the boys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.